Thomas Callahan first saw her in the quietest hour of the morning, long before the sun had even thought about touching the horizon. The Grand Oceanana Resort's marble lobby gleamed under the dim glow of chandeliers, and there she was, a slender figure in worn gray scrubs, mopping the floor with a rhythm so precise it felt like a secret ritual. Every stroke of her mop was deliberate, slow enough to be graceful, yet efficient enough to suggest she knew exactly how long she could linger before moving on. The faint swish of water against marble was the only sound in the cavernous space, and somehow it carried more authority than a raised voice. Thomas remained hidden behind the concierge desk, his maintenance uniform hanging loose on his tall frame. It had been 3 days since he'd gone undercover, hoping to see firsthand why the resort's service ratings had been slipping, why morale had plummeted, and why company stock had quietly bled 12% over the past 6 months. He'd expected to find laziness, corner-cutting, maybe even theft. What he hadn't expected was her. She couldn't have been older than 22, but there was something ancient in the way she worked, something unshaken, as if she belonged to a different pace of life than everyone else in the building. While most cleaning staff drifted through their shifts with half their attention buried in their phones or escaping to smoke breaks, this girl seemed to anticipate imperfections before they even happened. It wasn't just cleaning. It was caretaking, almost like she was protecting the place. She passed the towering glass windows overlooking the Pacific, her reflection momentarily floating beside the black ocean beyond. Outside, the night still held its grip on the water, save for the faintest thread of gray along the horizon. In a few hours, the lobby would be overrun by guests demanding perfect coffee, softer sheets, and invisible service. But right now, this was her hour. Thomas had built a career on decoding people. As the youngest CEO in Oceanana Hospitality Group's history, he prided himself on reading employees like open books. But she was written in a language he didn't know. When she vanished into a service corridor, he waited, then followed, his borrowed work boots squeaking like an unwanted confession on the now spotless floor. The service areas were a hidden world. Narrow halls lined with supply closets, faded break rooms, and staircases no guest would ever see. The girl moved through it like she'd memorized every shortcut, every stubborn stain, every burned-out bulb. He found her in the break room, restocking coffee supplies with the same disciplined grace she'd shown in the lobby. Her movements were smooth, economical, almost meditative. Thomas stepped into the doorway. "I don't think we've met," he said, adopting the easy tone of a new hire. "I'm Tom, maintenance." She looked up, and for a moment, his chest tightened. Her eyes were dark, sharp, but shadowed by something unspoken, like a creature that had learned to hide in plain sight. "Alina," she replied softly, her voice barely brushing the air before she returned her gaze to the coffee station. "How long have you been here?" he asked, leaning casually against the frame. She paused. So briefly, most people would have missed it. But Thomas had built his life on noticing pauses. "A while," she said at last. "And which cleaning company are you with?" "I'm still figuring out who's who." This time her hesitation was longer. "I should get back to work." She gathered her supplies and slipped past him, close enough for him to catch the faint chemical scent of floor cleaner mingled with something intangible. Sadness, he thought, if sadness could have a smell. For the next 2 hours, he shadowed her from a distance. She cleaned restrooms with the kind of precision that would pass a white glove inspection. She restocked towels in the spa, replaced burnt-out bulbs in the gym, even picked up stray litter in the parking garage. But there was something about her that unsettled him. He never saw her clock in, never saw her take a break, never saw her interact with anyone. It was like she existed in a parallel version of the resort, one that brushed against his world but never fully stepped inside it. By the time the official cleaning crew arrived at 6, she was gone. Thomas checked the parking lot, the service entrances, even the bus stop outside the gates. Nothing. It was as if she had dissolved with the dawn. Jerry, Thomas asked one of the maintenance supervisors later that morning. You know an Alina from the cleaning crew? Jerry frowned. Alina? Never heard of her. Lobby's cleaned by Sunshine Services, but they don't start till 6. Maybe you saw Consuela. Been here forever, pushing 60. Thomas shook his head. Numbers, she was young. Dark hair. Said her name was Alina. Jerry shrugged. Beats me, boss. And with that, the mystery only deepened. Thomas tried to convince himself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe she was new, maybe her paperwork was stuck somewhere in corporate limbo. But he knew better. He was corporate. And in his world, no one could set foot on resort property in an official capacity without being logged, screened, and cleared. The legal and insurance risks alone would send the company's attorneys into a full-scale panic. By that afternoon, his curiosity had tipped into something sharper. He did something no business school case study would recommend, certainly nothing his Harvard professors would have approved of. He crouched behind a massive decorative palm in the lobby, the kind chosen by interior designers to create tropical elegance, and waited. The resort's afternoon shift was in full bloom. Guests lounged beside the infinity pool, their cocktails costing more than a day's pay for some of the staff. The sunlight gilded every surface, the ocean's rhythmic hush making the scene look like a brochure come to life. But Thomas wasn't watching the guests. His attention was fixed on the hidden arteries of the building, the service elevators, the back corridors, those invisible veins through which the people who kept the resort alive quietly moved. At 3:15, she appeared. Alina stepped out of a service elevator, pushing a linen cart stacked high with fresh towels. She moved like smoke, present but never in the way, flowing around guests without interrupting conversations or blocking their view of the sea. The efficiency was uncanny. She didn't just avoid being noticed. It was as though she'd mastered the art of existing just outside the edges of perception. Thomas dialed the head of housekeeping. Maria, it's Tom from maintenance. Quick question. Do you have an Alina on your team? Young, early 20s? Alina? Maria's voice crackled. Number no Alina. Why? Is there an issue? No issue, he lied, eyes locked on the girl as she wiped down the poolside bar. Just checking. He ended the call and immediately rang the HR director. Linda, I need you to check our system for an Alina. Any department, any contractor, any vendor. The hold music felt like an eternity. Linda came back with a clipped answer. Tom, I've checked everything. No Alina in our system. Are you sure about the name? Thomas was sure about many things. That his education had prepared him for any professional challenge. That every problem could be solved with enough information. That people didn't simply appear in luxury resorts and work for free. But as he watched Alina vanish again into the service corridors, he realized none of those certainties mattered anymore. Because either he was losing his mind, or someone was working in his resort who officially didn't exist. And in Thomas's experience, people who didn't exist always had a reason for staying invisible. His instincts, honed by years of corporate problem-solving, took over. He decided to gather data, not gossip, not impressions, but proof. The next morning, long before dawn, he was in the security office under the pretext of reviewing footage for maintenance optimization. The night guard, Rodriguez, barely glanced up from his crossword. Mind if I run through yesterday's service corridor footage? Thomas asked, keeping his tone casual. Knock yourself out, boss, Rodriguez muttered. Just don't touch my coffee setup. Thomas fast-forwarded through hours of empty hallways until 4:43 a.m. and froze. Alina appeared on the lobby camera, mop in hand, but the timestamp was wrong. It was as if she'd stepped through solid wall. Switching to the service corridor feed, he saw nothing. No entry, no approach. Just her suddenly being there. Rodriguez, Thomas asked carefully, you ever see unauthorized people here after hours? The guard gave him a curious look. You mean drunk guests? Sure. Number employees who maybe shouldn't be here. Rodriguez set his pen down. You talking about the ghost girl? The words hit Thomas like a shot of cold air. Yeah, some staff call her that. Shows up, does her thing, vanishes. Been happening for about 3 weeks now. I figured she was with some contractor. Not my job to check paperwork. Thomas's pulse hammered in his ears. For the rest of the morning, he followed her from a careful distance, recording every task. She cleaned without pause, without food, without conversation. Her ID badge was so faded and scratched that the logo barely showed. Crystal Clean Services, a name Thomas didn't recognize. On his lunch break, he called them. Hi, this is Tom Callahan from the Grand Oceanana Resort. I'm calling about one of your employees, Alina. Need to update some paperwork. A pause. Sir, we don't have anyone by that name, and we haven't had a contract with your resort in over 2 years. If someone's wearing our badge, it's either very old or... He ended the call before she could finish. That afternoon brought more shadows to the puzzle. While pretending to fix a faucet near the staff break room, Thomas overheard 2 housekeepers talking. I'm telling you, Maria, she just showed up one day and started working, one said. Maybe she's undocumented, the other whispered. You know how it is. Some people will work for nothing just to blend in, or maybe she's casing the place. Rich guests, jewelry, cash. Could be she's planning something. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. He didn't like assumptions, especially ones that painted someone in danger or suspicion without proof. But the problem was, even now, he couldn't tell if Alina was someone who needed protecting, or someone they needed protecting from. Thomas Callahan was no stranger to theft. Over the years, he had dealt with employees skimming petty cash, contractors inflating invoices, and a range of corporate betrayals. But this felt different. It was personal, an unease that settled deep in his bones. That evening, his notebook was a dense mosaic of observations that refused to add up cleanly. An outdated ID badge from a company with no active contract, no clock-ins or clock-outs, no trace on any official schedule, no hiring paperwork, no background checks. She worked strange hours, slipping through shifts when the resort was thinnest, yet moved with intimate knowledge of every hallway, every routine. Looking at it objectively, the facts pointed to one hard truth. Alina was either stealing wages by impersonating an employee or gathering intelligence for something far more dangerous. The third morning arrived gray and heavy, storm clouds roiling over the Pacific, mirroring the storm in Thomas's mind. Sleep had eluded him as he spun through every possible scenario, every gut instinct screaming that something was deeply wrong. He found Alina at 7 a.m., right in the thick of the morning shift change, when the resort bustled with life. Guests hustled through checkouts, new arrivals waited impatiently for rooms, and the coffee crowd sipped overpriced lattes, oblivious to the undercurrents beneath the polished surface. This was the perfect chaos to vanish in, but Thomas noticed everything. This time, he didn't hide. He approached her directly, mop in hand near the concierge desk, the borrowed maintenance uniform lending him a shred of official authority. Excuse me, he said, voice carrying enough to draw a few curious glances. I need to speak with you. Alina's eyes lifted, a flicker of something caught in them, fear, recognition, or maybe both. Her grip tightened on the mop handle like it was the last anchor keeping her steady. You're not on any employee roster, Thomas continued, his tone firm but measured, echoing in the vast marble lobby. No contract, no valid ID, you're trespassing on private property. The mop dropped with a sharp clatter that seemed to silence the room. Alina froze, dark eyes wide and shimmering with a vulnerability that almost looked like betrayal. Conversations halted. Guests turned to watch the unfolding confrontation. A woman in a designer tracksuit pulled her children close, instinctively protective. Thomas's heart thudded with conviction. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now before I call security. The lobby's stillness stretched like a held breath. Guests clutching designer coffee cups, staff frozen mid-task, even the concierge stopped typing. Alina's body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to leap, her eyes flicking toward the service corridor. For a moment, Thomas thought she might bolt, but then the tension drained from her shoulders. Resignation settled over her like a shroud. "Jerry," Thomas called to the maintenance supervisor who had silently appeared, sensing trouble. "We need to handle this carefully." Jerry Martinez had been navigating luxury resorts and their crises for over 15 years. His calm approach came from experience with everything, from drunken celebrities to emergency situations. "What's going on, Tom?" Jerry asked, eyes locked on Alina. "This woman has been working here for weeks without authorization," Thomas explained, voice steady with the weight of command. "No employee record, no valid ID, no contract from any approved vendor. She's trespassing." The word hit Alina like a physical blow. She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to make herself smaller, far younger than her years. "Miss," Jerry said, tone professional but gentle, "do you have authorization to be working here?" Alina's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm just helping my dad." Thomas felt a flash of irritation. Even caught red-handed, she was spinning a story. He'd heard this kind of excuse before, people who thought a family tie could shield them from consequences. "Your dad," Thomas pressed, voice sharp. "Because I've checked every department, every contractor, every vendor. Nobody knows who you are." For the first time since the confrontation began, Alina met his gaze with a quiet dignity that caught him off guard. "He works nights," she said simply. "Convenient," Thomas replied, skepticism thick in his tone. "Look, I don't know what kind of scam you're running, but it ends now," Thomas said, his patience fraying. "Jerry, call security." "Wait," Alina said, stepping forward cautiously. Guests instinctively stepped back, sensing something fragile in her presence. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't stolen. I haven't hurt anyone. "You've been stealing wages," Thomas interrupted, voice cold and unyielding. "Working under false pretenses, using supplies and equipment you have no right to. That's theft." Jerry was already reaching for his radio. "Security to main lobby, please. Non-emergency escort needed." The minutes that followed were a blur of hushed whispers and sideways glances. 2 uniformed security officers arrived, their professionalism keeping the scene from escalating into spectacle. "Ma'am," the taller guard said softly, "we need you to come with us." Alina nodded without resistance, her movements methodical as always, picking up her cleaning supplies as if to erase any trace she'd been there at all. The small procession moved through the service corridors. 2 guards, 1 supervisor, 1 undercover CEO, and 1 quiet girl seemingly fading away before their eyes. Guests quickly returned to their conversations, satisfied the situation was handled, the illusion of safety restored. But then came the shout, "Wait! Wait! That's my daughter!" Thomas spun around to see an elderly man hurrying toward them, his steps unsteady but urgent. Weathered by years of labor, his salt and pepper hair and lined face told a story of a life built on hard work and quiet endurance. In that instant, the cold certainty Thomas had carried all day gave way to something more complicated, something raw and human that threatened to unravel the neat order of his investigation. Manuel Rodriguez, known to most as the easygoing night security guard Thomas had seen engrossed in crossword puzzles, now appeared before them with a determination that defied his years. Jerry's brow furrowed in confusion as Manuel's eyes locked onto Alina with a fierce tenderness that instantly shattered the cold tension in the hallway. Her composure cracked for the first time, her face folding into a mixture of relief, worry, and a shame so raw it seemed to expose all her secrets at once. "Papa," she whispered, the single word dissolving the distance between the two and revealing a daughter caught in the crossfire of loyalty and desperation. "That's my daughter," Manuel repeated, his voice heavy with exhaustion and emotion. "Alina is my daughter." Thomas felt the ground shift beneath him. Every logical deduction, every assumption about theft and trespassing suddenly hung suspended like dust motes in the air, weightless, uncertain, meaningless. Your daughter? Thomas's voice sharpened, harsher than intended. Then why isn't she on any payroll? Why has she been sneaking around because I asked her to? Manuel interrupted quietly, and in that sudden stillness the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Leaning heavily against the corridor wall, Manuel looked older than his 63 years. His left hand trembled subtly, a detail Thomas caught only because his gaze never wavered from the man before him, searching for the truth behind every gesture. I've been night security here for 14 years, Manuel began steadily, despite the emotion flickering in his eyes. I started when Alina was 8, after her mother died. This job saved us. Jerry shifted, recalling the countless night shifts shared with Manuel, fixing broken air conditioners, handling emergencies that couldn't wait for daylight. 3 weeks ago, Manuel continued, voice lowering, I had what the doctors called a mild stroke. They said I was lucky. He let out a bitter laugh, the kind that tastes like regret. You know what lucky looks like when you're 63 and your only skill is walking the building all night. Thomas felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach but kept his face impassive. What does this have to do with your daughter working here illegally? They cleared me for light duty, Manuel said softly. No heavy lifting, no bending, no physical exertion, just observation and reporting. He met Thomas's gaze squarely. Ever try doing security without being able to bend to check locks, lift equipment, or move fast in an emergency? The corridor was silent except for the distant hum of resort operations, the elevators, ringing phones, and the quiet pulse of a place that never truly slept. I knew they'd find a reason to let me go, Manuel admitted. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Too old, too slow, too much of a liability. And then what? Social Security won't cover rent, let alone college for Alina. Alina, standing quietly beside the guards, finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. Papa, you don't have to. Yes, I do, mija. Manuel's voice was firm but gentle. This man thinks you're a thief. He needs to understand. Thomas found himself leaning in, caught off guard by the raw honesty in Manuel's words, a truth that pierced his corporate-trained cynicism. She came to visit me one night about 3 weeks ago, Manuel said, swallowing hard. I was struggling to check the locks on the ground floor. My left side still doesn't work right after the stroke. I was taking forever, sweating and frustrated. He paused, wiping a sudden tear from his cheek with the back of his hand. Alina watched for 10 minutes and then said, Papa, let me help. Just like that. Like it was the most natural thing. So she started doing parts of your job, Thomas said cautiously. The physical parts, Manuel confirmed. The bending, the lifting, the detailed cleaning that makes the reports look good. She'd come after her classes at community college, use my spare uniform, and help me finish the rounds. His voice cracked with emotion. She never asked for a penny. A younger security guard cleared his throat. Manuel, why didn't you report this? We have procedures for family members. Manuel's answer was simple and raw. I was afraid. Afraid they'd use it as an excuse to fire me. Afraid I couldn't do my job anymore. Afraid of losing the only income we've had for 14 years. Thomas felt like the entire story had shifted beneath his feet. Everything familiar, everything he thought he understood, suddenly rewired with new meaning. She made me promise not to tell anyone, Manuel said, looking at Alina with a mixture of pride and sorrow. If management knew, they'd fire me or her. Either way, we'd both be out. Alina finally spoke directly to Thomas, her voice low but resolute. I just wanted to protect him. He's worked so hard his whole life. This place, it's his second home. The other guards respect him. The staff trusts him. I couldn't let a stroke take that away from him. Thomas stood there, rooted in the harsh fluorescent light of the service corridor, surrounded by the smells and sounds of a business he thought he knew. His logical deductions, his assumptions about theft and deception, they crumbled like a house caught in a hurricane. He had been so certain, so righteously angry, so convinced he was protecting his company from exploitation. Instead, he had been chasing a daughter trying to save her father's dignity and a man fighting to hold on to the last thread of his independence. For the first time in his life, Thomas Callahan was utterly, completely speechless. The rest of the day passed in a fog of guilt and revelation. Jerry quietly suggested that perhaps misunderstandings happen. The security guards melted away with practiced discretion, and Alina returned to work without a word, carefully avoiding Thomas's gaze. But Thomas couldn't let it go. Not now. That evening, in the resort's administrative offices, he sat with Linda Martinez, the HR director, and David Kim, the operations manager. Posing as Tom from maintenance, he carefully brought up his concerns about undocumented workers helping each other in unofficial ways. Linda, a seasoned HR veteran of 20 years, was wary of employees probing too deeply. "What kind of patterns?" she asked. "I think security footage might explain better than words," Thomas said, pulling up weeks of surveillance. Together they watched Alina move through the resort with an efficiency that outshone the official cleaning contractors. Her work was precise, thorough, almost choreographed, displaying a care that couldn't be faked. "Look at the quality," Thomas pointed out. "She's not just going through the motions, she cares." Linda and David exchanged a look, recalling improvements in certain areas they'd chalked up to better contractor management. "Who is she?" David asked. "She's Manuel Rodriguez's daughter," Thomas said quietly. "She's been helping him with the physical parts of his job since his stroke." The room grew still as Linda Martinez and David Kim absorbed the story. Both knew Manuel well. He'd been with the resort longer than either of them. Linda's voice softened with genuine concern. "He had a stroke?" "3 weeks ago," Thomas replied. "It was mild, but it affected his mobility. He was too afraid to report it because he thought he'd lose his job. The weight of that reality hung heavy in the air. So, his daughter stepped in, unpaid, to help him maintain his performance and dignity." David was already pulling up Manuel's employment file. 14 years here, no disciplinary actions, consistently positive reviews, never missed a shift. He paused as he scrolled through recent records. He took 3 sick days 3 weeks ago, then came back because his daughter's been compensating for his physical limitations. Thomas posed a question that settled like a stone in the pit of his stomach. How many other employees were in similar situations? Over the next hour, Thomas led them through what he privately called the audit that changed everything. They uncovered stories like Rosa Martinez in housekeeping, whose teenage son came after school to lift heavy mattresses she couldn't manage after back surgery. James Wheeler in maintenance had his brother-in-law assisting with electrical work that his arthritic hands made difficult. Even Consuela Vasquez in laundry was supported by her daughter-in-law on weekends, helping fold comforters that strained Consuela's aching shoulders. "My God," Linda whispered, overwhelmed. "How many people are working here who aren't officially working here?" Thomas's voice dropped to a quiet resolve. "The better question is, how many loyal employees are we failing?" David leaned back, running his hands through his hair. "They've been here for years, decades even, and they're so afraid of losing their jobs they bring family members to work for free rather than ask for help." Thomas nodded, feeling the crushing weight of corporate leadership in a way he never had. From his executive office, employee issues had been numbers on spreadsheets, policies to enforce. But down here, amidst the daily grind of operations, they were people. Parents with mortgages, bills, children needing college tuition. "What kind of culture creates this level of fear?" he asked quietly, though the answer was painfully clear. A culture he had helped build, one obsessed with efficiency, cost control, and metrics that reduced people to data points. Linda was scanning employee files, cross-referencing ages, tenure, and recent reviews. "Every unofficial helper we found is family to our most loyal, longest-serving employees," she said. "People who have given years of their lives here, And every one of those employees was too afraid to ask for the accommodations they needed. David added, "They'd rather risk their jobs by working around the system than trust the system to support them." Something inside Thomas shifted, a long-held tightness loosening. He looked around the small office, the employee handbook on Linda's desk, the charts on David's wall, all the corporate machinery that had somehow missed the most vital part, the people themselves. That night, alone in his corner office with its panoramic ocean view and polished leather furniture, Thomas Callahan composed an email that would change everything. To all department heads and senior management, from Thomas Callahan. Subject: mandatory leadership meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Body: we need to talk about everything. He stared at the screen a moment, then hit send. A quiet revolution was beginning. 4 days later, Alina Rodriguez stood outside the Grand Oceanana Resort's main entrance, trembling as she clutched the phone message that summoned her back. The voice on the recording had been polite but official. "Ms. Rodriguez, please report to Conference Room A at 2 p.m. today to discuss your recent activities at the resort." Since that humiliating day in the lobby, when security had escorted her out, she had barely slept. She had returned to her community college classes, picked up shifts waitressing on weekends, and tried to convince herself that the 3 weeks helping her father had been worth the risk. Now, summoned again, fear and uncertainty gnawed at her. The lobby, bathed in afternoon light, bustled with wealthy guests who lived worlds apart from hers. She kept her head low, walking to the elevator, painfully aware that these same guests had witnessed her public accusation. Conference Room A was on the administrative floor, a place she'd never seen before. The door was heavy wood with frosted glass, signaling weighty decisions were made behind it. She knocked softly. "Come in," a voice she didn't recognize called. Alina stepped inside a room that looked like a movie set. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Pacific. At the far end sat a man in a tailored suit, his dark hair neat, eyes sharp blue, taking in everything. It took her a moment to realize. "Tom?" she asked, confused. "From maintenance?" Thomas Callahan rose slowly, moving with the assured poise of a man who never actually fixed faucets. "My name is Thomas Callahan," he said quietly. "I'm the CEO of Oceanana Hospitality Group." The words hit her like a cold wave. She sank into a nearby chair, mind reeling. "I was conducting what we call an undercover audit," Thomas explained, moving closer. "I wanted to see how the resort really operates from the ground up. I never expected to find—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Someone like you." Alina's cheeks flushed with shame. "I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have been there, but my father—" "Your father is a remarkable man," Thomas interrupted gently, "and what you did for him was extraordinary." He slid a folder toward her. "I've spent the last 4 days learning things about my own company that I should have known years ago. About employees too afraid to ask for help. About people who risk everything rather than admit struggle." Alina opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was an official job offer on company letterhead, her name at the top. Guest Experience Coordinator. "It's a new position," Thomas explained. "Someone who understands the resort from the ground up. Someone who notices what management misses. Someone who can identify when employees need support before they're desperate enough to risk their jobs." Alina stared at the offer. Full benefits, paid vacation, a salary beyond her dreams. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I worked harder for no pay in those 3 weeks than most contractors do for full wages." "You saw problems and fixed them without being asked," Thomas said softly. "You understood what needed doing and did it invisibly, efficiently, perfectly." He smiled warmly. "The resort ran better with you here." Tears slid down Alina's cheeks. "What about my father?" "Your father has been promoted to senior night security supervisor," Thomas replied. "He'll train new security staff and mentor employees needing accommodations. No more physical rounds, just his expertise and 14 years of knowledge." Alina's voice broke. You saw me when I was invisible. No, Thomas said quietly. You were never invisible. I just wasn't looking closely enough. 3 weeks later, Alina walked through the lobby wearing a crisp navy blazer embroidered with her name and a badge proclaiming her official place as Guest Experience Coordinator. She paused near the concierge desk, the very spot where she had once mopped floors in the early dawn. A guest approached with a housekeeping complaint. Alina listened intently, then smiled. Let me look into that right away, she said, pulling out her company phone. As she headed toward the elevator, she caught her reflection in the gleaming marble floor. Not a shadow slipping through others' spaces, but a professional with authority and purpose, firmly belonging. Behind the concierge desk, Thomas watched with a quiet smile. Sometimes the best employees aren't the ones you hire. Sometimes they're the ones who choose you.